So hello and welcome to our November webinar. So we're already at the end of the year. This session will deal with some opportunities to discuss the sector of property valuation. We are joined by one of our leading academics here at the University of Manchester within the school, and we're very excited to be joined by him. So first of all, we'll do some introductions before leaping into discovering a bit more about careers in real estate and the property valuation sector. My name is Jessica and I'm the course advisor for this Masters in Real Estate. This is a part-time programme and we'll come on to talk a bit more detail at the end of the session about the course and all of the important information which you need to know. My contact information is on all of the slides, so if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email address. If you're watching this session live, then you can pop a question in the Q&A box and we will answer it at the end or partway through the session. And if you're watching this back on demand on our YouTube channel, then you can send us an email to have your questions answered and we'll pass those on to our panelists. So we are joined today by Mark. Mark, how are you doing today?
Hi, how are you, Jess? I'm doing fine, thank you.
Great. Would you like to offer a little introduction about yourself to our attendees?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Shepherd. I'm the Programme Director for this MSc in Real Estate by Blended Learning, but I'm also Subject Leader for the Property Valuation discipline. My background is that I started off in practice. I came into academia about 20 odd years ago, but I kept my own practice going primarily in valuation and taxation for a good few years, and so hopefully I can give you a bit of practical insight as well as academic insight.
Definitely. So we're going to start off with a bit of content by yourself, Mark, aren't we? So I'll hand over to you at this point.
Right. So I just thought it'd be interesting to explore some of the current or emerging or indeed developed issues in valuation practice, and just some of the things that have come to the fore, particularly as a result of COVID and lockdown and changes in the market. I think we've seen quite an increase in desktop valuations, as you might expect, although I can't really pretend that this is a new thing. Desktop valuations have always been around. Clients quite often ask for them. In fact, when I used to do mortgage valuations not so long ago, we even had one called a drive-by, where it was what it says on the tin. You literally drove by the property and did everything else from your desktop. And I guess, you know, the challenges here, of course, are how do we find out all the information we need about a property in order to value it effectively? Certainly I found that whilst for standard properties, it was pretty practical, where properties were unusual, it really didn't work because it's very difficult to get the right picture, the right sense of the property without actually physically seeing it, especially if it's been substantially changed inside. So, you know, one of the things that's been particularly popular, is that the right word, common anyway, during lockdown, is the idea of a video inspection or a real-time tour. Which is great because that overcomes the problems of not being able to see the inside of the property. But it also requires potentially different skills from the valuer. You can imagine if there is someone showing around the property, they know it really well. There may be areas they particularly want you to see, and let's be honest, there may be things they particularly don't want you to see. So, you know, part of it is your job to direct them to ensure that you see the things you need to see. Having said that, I think it's still a partial view, because I think we use all our senses when we're inspecting or surveying a property. You know, how do you pick up whether it's damp? Well, often it's the sense of smell that picks that up first, or you know, if there are some structural inconsistencies, sometimes it's just the sound that you pick up on. But nevertheless, you know, it's a big improvement. But all of these things were happening. It's just a question of, you know, maybe the pace of change has accelerated somewhat. Distributed working is an interesting one, because you would think, wouldn't you, that property valuation is quite a solitary activity. But actually, I don't think it is. Often, as valuers, we discuss properties, we discuss values, we discuss ideas with each other. And so that sort of communal opportunity to share information and share experience is incredibly important. So I think whilst distributed working is often a natural part of valuers' lives, I think, you know, that time in the office is incredibly valuable. The other thing I thought is just getting access to information. Valuations rely on information, and as I'll talk about in a moment, there are lots of online data sources, but the most common means of gaining information about property transactions where you don't already have that data is you phone up the agent and you ask them what happened, and you can get a lot more detail that way. But obviously with distributed working, you know, where people aren't in the office, it may be more challenging to get hold of them, or timescales may be extended. And you know, this is a mutual exchange of information. So, you know, you'll go to an agent and say, can you help me with this? You know, a few days or weeks later, they'll come back to you and say, aha, I know you sold this property at this time, or you were involved in this transaction. Can you tell me more about it? So, you know, the profession does support each other to some extent, but, you know, that often valuation timescales are quite short, and therefore not being able to access people in quite the same way can be a challenge. In a former life, apart from studying real estate, as you would imagine, I also studied IT for a while. And the thing that struck me about that is, you know, companies put lots of money, time and effort into making sure that their internal systems and networks are secure. And although remote working or distributed working is not new, the sudden expansion in that has presented problems in terms of ensuring security for everybody as part of that process. As valuers, we often rely on online data sources, and in the residential market, they're relatively accessible. In the commercial market, they are pretty good. I'm in the UK, probably the most common ones are either CoStar or EG Radius. The university subscribes to both for their students, by the way, little plug there. But one of the challenges with the data on these systems is that sometimes they're not as fully detailed as they might be. So you still have to follow them up with the agent. And the reliability of that data, you know, how much confidence can you have in online data? The answer is generally they are checked with the parties that provide the data, and so there is definitely some confidence that you can have, but nevertheless, unless you have the full details of the transaction, it's very difficult to make a judgment about where it fits within the market. I suppose the other thing that's been a big issue is material uncertainty. The RICS have had to publish guidance on this. Now, what's material uncertainty? Well, all markets have uncertainty, a certain amount of difference of opinion, which is legitimate. But when suddenly COVID hits and nobody really knows what impact is going to have, or you know, they don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, or different countries have different rules governing their citizens and work and so on, then you know, the market becomes more challenging and the number of transactions falls. So material uncertainty starts to creep in, the idea that there is something that, you know, we really need to be careful to make our clients aware of. And certainly for a while, the RICS had to publish regular updates on guidance on this because the situation was so unprecedented. One could argue that it's settled down somewhat by now, but that's certainly been the case. So I was thinking about which sectors have performed well or otherwise during, and if we can call it post-pandemic, perhaps we can't, but certainly as our response has evolved, how have things changed? And I've been reading lots of really interesting reports, as you might imagine. But for example, high street retail has tended to attract a lot of pessimistic commentary, and yet actually the market is very variable. So prime high street retail is still performing relatively well, but it's the secondary and tertiary locations, the sort of off-pitch or non-core locations that sometimes are suffering. So I don't think, one of the things we have to be careful about in the property market is just giving a blanket view, but I think we have to take a more nuanced view to understand it effectively. And I think the same applies to hospitality. Valuing hospitality property is all about turnover. It's all about fair, maintainable trade. And, you know, clearly that's been massively impacted by the things that have been happening. But how do we factor that in? Do we expect that to continue? Do we expect people to come back to hospitality property? It was an interesting suggestion that I read in one report that although business travel had reduced, actually because of the staycation principle, you know, personal travel and personal hotel stays had increased quite significantly, perhaps not to entirely fill the gap, but perhaps more than you would think. Food and e-commerce generally have been a big part of our changing consumer habits, temporary, possibly, during the pandemic. But this has brought a really interesting focus on logistics. One of the things I was intrigued about when I was thinking about logistics, healthcare, also logistics and healthcare both became attractive, particularly attractive for investments because they were seen as quite secure, safe bets, unlike, for example, retail, which has always traditionally been seen as a safe bet. So logistics, the idea of, you know, with the expansion of e-commerce and the need to get goods to customers, and what's called inshoring or nearshoring, the fact that because supply chains, global supply chains were disrupted, production or storage was coming closer to home, that had quite an important impact on the market. Student accommodation is really interesting. I've put a green mark against that. You might think with, you know, some universities having been online rather than in person, has that had a serious impact on the student accommodation market? Well, yes, it has, but actually, I think there's a general sense that a lot of private investment in student accommodation is driven by international student market. And certainly our experience, and I think probably the experience of lots of universities, they are keen to come back. So it's seen as a temporary hiatus, if you like, that is starting to recover. Offices, what's the scoop with offices? Well, I think hybrid or flexible working is probably here to stay. And it was interesting that some office occupiers are talking about not needing less space, but using the space they have in different ways, less as a traditional office and more as a space for meeting, collaborating, perhaps the sort of things that we might expect. And actually, in some ways, the things that co-working spaces are already quite keen on. Residential, oh gosh, I guess some of the most interesting things are the areas in the country that have benefited from people moving out of urban areas into more rural areas and reprioritizing other things, but also the premium that's being put on outdoor space in many types of residential property. In fact, I wish I could remember the name, but there's a new block of flats being developed in Manchester, specifically with the needs of people who might be in lockdown in mind. I don't mean longer term, but just the idea that, you know, even though they're flats, that there is outdoor space, there is lots of other facilities. So just some things about the future of property valuation. I think first and foremost, we are inevitably in a new normal, whatever that means. But I quite like the acronym VUCA, which has been around for a while. You know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Let's unpack that just a little bit. So volatility, we're really thinking about the speed of change in the market. Uncertainty, how confident can we be in predicting the future? I think for complexity, we're talking about the number of factors to be accounted for, I suppose, is really what we're talking about there. And finally, ambiguity, clarity of interpretation. So, for example, in valuation, during lockdown, there were fewer transactions. And so, there's less data out there to use to predict future changes. Now, the RICS, for example, have taken this on board in two interesting reviews or consultations that they're working on at the moment. The first one is review of real estate investment valuation. This is nothing new. They've done multiple reviews, but this one is interesting because it's looking at four key things: valuation methods, risk analysis, forward-looking, in an environment of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. How valuers can remain independent and objective, a perennial question, and also market confidence in valuer performance. Are they delivering what the client needs? And I think that's very timely, albeit, we're all having to adapt to a challenging environment. The other thing that the RICS are currently consulting on, and I think is incredibly important, is the sustainability in property valuation. What's the role of the valuer? How do we assess buildings and their sustainable features, given that there are so many different mechanisms for evaluating the sustainability of buildings: LEED, BREEAM, the WELL building standard, and so on. And also, how do we reflect these in different aspects of valuation, or how much influence should they have compared to all the other factors we have to take into account? So, studying valuation, interesting times, I think, is my summary of the situation.
I think that's been a great summary, Mark, and you've touched on a lot of key areas there. Obviously, on this slide, we've talked a little bit about the RICS, yes. But just to really draw into the theme of the webinar, we want to talk about how property valuation can support our students' career. And the property valuation unit is a large part of the Masters in Real Estate. What would your advice be for someone who is looking to qualify as an RICS valuer?
Okay, that's a great question. I think two things about that. One is that the course provides exemption from the academic requirements of the RICS, but there is an experiential requirement. You have to work normally for at least 2 years, diarise that experience, and then you have an interview at the end of that time. Now, why is this important? Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is that the RICS, I think probably it's fair to say, in a number of countries, is seen as the badge of professionalism of the valuer. There are other institutions, and there are some fabulous ones there, but obviously we're interested in the RICS in particular. And their role is about valuation standards as well as valuation practice, and they regulate valuers. So you have to become a registered valuer if you want to undertake property valuation in particular. Now, to do that, you have to study and practice valuation to a certain level. But that means, in principle, when you go out there, when you're approaching clients, when clients are looking for people to do their valuation work, you have that badge of authority, that professional stamp of approval. And the RICS will audit its members, its registered valuers, to ensure that they're doing things properly, and clients know this and appreciate this, and it does bring business. But also for you, it gives you the confidence that you're being supported by an institution with a clear regulatory framework, with a clear audit trail, and so on. And I think that from a professional valuer point of view, it's one of the few routes that gives you that level of confidence. One aside is I'm an APC assessor, which means I assess students at their final interview, and I do valuation and commercial property. Those are my two main areas. And it's interesting that actually most of the candidates going into valuation are going through the commercial property route and just making sure they're getting the right experience in valuation. And my personal view is I think that's really good because it gives them that broader understanding of how real estate works, which is part of the point of the program as well. But whereas the standard valuation route, I think, is more designed for sort of government valuation specialists. My point about that is just, you know, our job is to add value, and therefore one of the things that this will help you do is add value for your client.
Definitely. And with the APC, obviously there are just so many different pathways which a student can choose to study, property valuation being just one of them. What other sorts of careers would you expect graduates of this course to go on to complete? Obviously, that's taking into consideration that many of our students who do study this course already are in full-time professions. They are taking this course to gain a broader understanding, but perhaps we had a candidate who was interested in entering into the real estate industry. What sort of careers would you expect would be available to them after this course?
Okay, great question. I think honestly this course, when I started out, would have been called something like general practice. And whilst that's rather an archaic term, it's actually quite helpful because it indicates that, you know, during the course, we cover valuation, as we've said, investment, development, and management. So all the core areas of real estate. And one of the good things about an RICS qualification is if you have an RICS accredited degree, you can then take your assessment of professional competence in any of these areas. So you could move into planning and development or valuation, management consulting, investment. So those are all opportunities available to you. And indeed, when I think back to the students that we have or have had on the program, I think they've got into all those areas and others. So, I mean, I could, well, as you probably know, I could talk for hours about it, but honestly, it is genuinely general practice in the sense that it covers the, you know, what I think of the four core areas of property management, property valuation, property development, and property investment.
So during our study expectations, we have just mentioned about the wide variety of units which are available on this course. So there are 8 taught units. Each of them are 20 credits each, which count up to 180 master's credits to gain your final qualification of a postgraduate qualification. That we do expect our students dedicate sort of 15 to 20 hours of study per week. This might be slightly more or slightly less depending on which part of the unit you're in, whether you're at the end towards your fine handing in your assessment. I'm a member of the WhatsApp group for our current cohort, and they are talking at the moment about how they've got their assessments doing, and they're talking all the last minute details about referencing and finding those final reading sources. So Mark will be glad to hear that. But yes, so you'll have 8 weeks of taught material at the start of the unit, and then you'll have 2 weeks to work on that final assessment. So that gives you plenty of time to dedicate and juggle your personal life and your professional life. Mark, I don't know if you want to briefly touch on the product-based inquiry.
Sure. So
Project-based
in terms of
inquiry.
the 8 taught units, there are 7 traditional units, 6 core, 1 option, and then the project, which is like a double unit, I suppose. And it's like a mini dissertation or research project, but the idea is it can be on anything you like around the real estate area. And it was really designed to give you a chance to engage with practice, either because you're already in practice and you want the time and the opportunity to research something that, you know what it's like when you're in practice, you're doing the job, but you don't have a lot of time to reflect. So maybe this is an opportunity to reflect on something you've done, some opportunities. Students use it because they think they like to work in a particular area, and it allows them to demonstrate their knowledge and capability in a particular aspect of real estate. So if you haven't done a dissertation before, it's smaller than a traditional dissertation at master's level, and it's more practice-based, but nonetheless, it gives you a chance to do a bit of extended writing and research on a subject of your choice. I mean, you will get a supervisor, we will help you through it. We're not just going to throw you out there and tell you to get on with it. But on the other hand, you know, you have some control over it. It could be on almost anything related to built environment.
It's great as well, because I have so many people coming in and saying, oh, I'm really interested in asset management, but there's only one asset management unit. I said, well, you can go in and you can focus your research project on your area of interest. So that's really great as well. And tailoring your assessments towards your areas of interest is a strong benefit of this program. So we've already touched on the fact here that this is an RICS accredited degree. This is a very prestigious institution, which we're very proud to be accredited by. Your fees are payable in instalments, so you can arrange this upon enrolling on the course, and there are some discounts available. So just check in with me as your course advisor to see whether you're eligible for those discounts. There are deadlines in place for our February and September intakes, but our application is now open for all of our intakes in 2022. So our next intake will be them. So we're very excited to receive your applications. There are many benefits of online learning, and we have touched on a lot of them today. The best thing that I can talk about with online learning is the opportunity to develop your career without having to relocate or put your career on pause, or to even have to consider changing career or anything like that. It's a great opportunity to move into a new environment without having to relocate or pause your career. So that is one of the highlights of online learning. We are a flexible course as well. So you will learn all of your resources online on the virtual learning environment, but there are also opportunities to develop professional networks through online workshops and things like that. So that is the benefit of studying with this course. You'll have live tutorials throughout the program, which will run in your time zone as well. So you're able to access them at times suitable for you. And we do really encourage building a worldwide community, don't we, Mark? It's a great opportunity for our students to get to know each other and develop those connections with other markets and to learn more about how other markets are operating. So we have many students from the UK interacting with students in Europe and in Asia as well. So it's a really diverse student cohort, particularly this year as well. So we will also be dealing with online learning and assessments. Obviously, this is an online program, so there is various different forms of content which you'll be introduced to. So some of this content will consist of webinars, podcasts, interactive material, things like that. This is very course focused, and you are able to contribute to this material as much as you like. So you are encouraged to obviously interact with your peers, with your community as well. And we do encourage discussion on our discussion boards throughout each unit, where you'll be able to share your ideas, comment on critical articles, and share your thoughts about the topics as well. This can be tutor-led as well, so sometimes our tutors will post a question in the discussion box, and they'll be asked to contribute. You'll be asked to contribute your thoughts, and sometimes they'll ask you to sort of stimulate your ideas as well. Throughout many of our units, you are expected to do some group work. These are really enjoyable projects and not something to be stressed about. It's an opportunity for you to get to know other working professionals and to share your ideas with each other in a sort of safe capacity. So you're not needing to travel anywhere or have any sort of professional expectations on the project. It is just a way for you to share your ideas and your material as well. If you do have any further questions and you think on later on and you've not asked something you wanted to answer, just send them to our email address on the screen. I am your dedicated course advisor for this program, so I'm here to help you to make the decision to study with us. I'm here to discuss the course as well, so if you have any questions about the course content, you're not completely sure about whether it's suitable for you, get in touch and we can talk it through. If you're concerned about the logistics of studying online, I can help with that as well. We can show you some sort of previous conversations that we've had with past students and put you in touch with one of our current students as well. So share your CV with me and I can have a look at this, and then we can arrange a personal conversation to discuss your experience in further detail. So thank you very much for attending this session today. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to hearing from you via email or WhatsApp. Thank you very much.